pleased to have our first winemaker from Burgundy, Jean-Nicolas Méo, joining us today. Bonjour, Jean-Nicolas.
Hello.
And where are you speaking from today?
I'm speaking from my office in Vinous.
And how's we were just talking just now about how is the weather down there, because it's cold here in the UK, and I was a little bit worried you might have a little bit of frost risk, because you did have a little bit of frost risk earlier in April, didn't you?
Well, no, very close, but actually with a lot of wind, so it did not really matter.
Yeah.
But we call this moment the Saint de Glace, the Ice Saints, and 11th, 12th, and 13th of May. They are supposed to be very dangerous, and the risk of frost is as its maximum before vanishing for the rest of the year. So we are experiencing a cold wave right now, but nothing dangerous. So 3-4 degrees during the night, but with a lot of wind, so it should not really matter.
And how are you coping with the lockdown situation?
Well, quite well, actually. We're very lucky. We're, as you know, weather was absolutely beautiful in France. So, I really was thinking about all these people locked down in small apartments in cities. We were lucky to be able to work into the vineyards and go out. And of course, it's hard work, but it's also the possibility of going out and enjoying and being outside and enjoying the good weather. So it's been a nice period, let's say. Of course, we do worry about, like everybody else, about a great number of things, but otherwise the conditions were quite good.
Is there anything, do you think, are you thinking ahead to say like harvest time? Because with sort of social distancing, do you have to prepare anything, or is that too far in advance?
I've forbidden everybody to talk talking about harvest. I don't want to hear about harvest. No, of course, I mean, there's so many things to worry about right now, and harvest is one of them. We're thinking about, what could happen in terms of social distancing, the transportation, the meals to the harvesters, a lot of logistic questions to think about, and are we going to have enough harvesters at all? We don't know. So it's at the same time, you have to think a little bit about it, because you want to really think ahead. But at the same time, there are many unknowns, and in a way, it's not worth it at this precise moment. It's not worth it to really worry. So many things you should worry about right now, that harvest is a little bit too distant. But we have it in mind. We have it in mind, of course.
Yeah. So I think during this episode, I think we should talk about the sort of history of the domain, and then the vineyards, your approaches. Then, of course, I'd like to talk a little bit about your project in Oregon as well, and then open out maybe generally about Burgundy. If anyone is watching this live, they can ask questions. I can see them coming in. I'll try and ask them if possible, but do send your questions early so that I can weave them in during our conversation.
Great.
If I can just start with the history of the domain. I must admit, it's a very complex history, domain Méo-Camuzet. I've read the history a few times, and there's different sides of the family. And can you sort of just explain a little bit about the history of the domain?
Sure. I think we have 2 hours, don't we?
Yeah. Till tomorrow. We'll cancel Christophe
Right.
Lumiere and.
Yes. No, yes, it's Actually, the Méo family is from originally from Burgundy, but really from the northern part of Burgundy. And I had a great grandfather that moved from the northern part of Burgundy to Nuit-Saint-Georges in the late 19th century. And my grandfather married a Von Romanet girl, and this is how we have a connection with Von Romanet and Whites. In the Méo and Lamarche, because my grandmother was a Lamarche family, there were very few vineyards. A history of winemaking too, but history. I had an ancestor killed in World War I, so it's really the damages of history. So there didn't remain a lot. So most of the domain comes from the Camuzet family. There also you have a history playing its role, because Camuzet was a well-known family in Von Romanet, having a nice domain. Etienne Camuzet ended up being a member of parliament for the Côte d'Or, and was therefore not a full-time vintner anymore. Had leased his domain. Etienne Camuzet, French people had very few kids at that time. So Etienne Camuzet had only one daughter, and she in turn had no children. So my father and the Méo and the Camuzet family knew each other quite well, and my father was the closest relative, actually. And when Maria Camuzet, the daughter of Etienne, died in 1959, my father discovered that she had donated the domain to him. So this is, yes, it's a complicated history, because we have the Camuzet family. We were distant relatives to the Camuzet family, but also very close, because it's very close. It's a small village. And so two families getting together, and probably Maria Camuset's choice to give the domain to my father was also for him to really remember Etienne Camuzet, her father, and so that the history of the Camuzet family could be remembered. So that's very shortly the history of the domain. And I mentioned that Etienne Camuzet was having his vineyard worked by tenants, and that continued under Maria, and that continued under my father. My father had a career in Paris at the time, so did not become a vintner, and that ended with me in 1989, when I when I came back to Von Romanet and started studying and make wine at that time. And progressively, our tenants went into retirement, and progressively I took over the holdings of the family. So this is very shortly how it happened.
And just a couple of questions, because your father had quite a distinguished career, didn't he? He was based in Paris, is that right?
Yes. My father was both a civil servant, politician, also businessman. I would say a very typical career of people of high civil servants at the time. In France, you can be a civil servant, but the state has many holdings, and so you were hired to go in there and to go. So he was advisor to the government, and he started his career into advising the government and being one of the special advisors to Charles de Gaulle, which of course was actually very prestigious at the time. Went into petroleum, went to advertising, press, back into petroleum. So very diverse and interesting career. Yes, but never forgot his domain in Von Romanet. And my grandparents were living in Von Romanet, so they kept an eye for my father, and my father went very regularly back to Vaughan. We were living in Paris at the time, but very regularly went to Vaughan and to keep an eye on his domain, and talk with the tenants and so on. So our relation with Vaughan Romanée has always been quite close.
So would you, for example, would you yourself go down to Vaughan Romanée on like holidays when you were young?
Yes, very frequently. Yes, very frequently. Actually, it's my grandfather who really took care of me and really gave me the love of the village and the love of the vineyards.
What's your earliest memories of going to Burgundy?
I don't know, I must have been 3 or 4, and I loved going there and be with my grandparents. It was very fun memories of that.
And can you tell me how Henri Jayer was a very important person for the domain? Can you tell me what his role was?
Yes, Henri was actually hired by Jean-Nicolas as one of the tenants. So that was in 1945. So just before Jean-Nicolas died, and Henri was a very young man at the time, but he saw, I guess, Jean-Nicolas saw a very promising vintner back then. And so Henri was one of the tenants.
Was he living in Vaughan Romanée at that time?
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of the tenants, he had holdings. He had the Richebourg, the Cros Parentou, of course, in 1945. There was no Cros Parentou, but Richebourg, Cros Parentou, Vaughan Brûlé, and also the Nuit Mergée. I mention all these vineyards because sometimes nowadays, I mean, Henri has become such a myth, as such an aura that I tasted one of your Nuit Boudot 85 or the Clos Vougeot 88. Great wine. Henri was a genius. Yes, that's true. Henri was a genius, but problem, he didn't make these wines. And so nowadays, people tend to associate us with and the wines of this time to Henri. He made certain some of our wines. Some of others were made by the other tenants, the Fourroy family, the Tardy, Jean Tardy, and so on. So we should not forget them. So Henri was one of the tenants for his career, and of course had very good relations with our family. And when he went into retirement at the end of the 80s, Henri was the oldest one, the first tenant to go into retirement, and this is when I took over.
What year was that? That was mid-80s?
End of 88, beginning of 89. Mm-hmm. And so I had decided a few years back to go and busy myself with the domain. But truth was, I had a small enology degree in Dijon, but truth was that I didn't know really the work. So my father hired Henri as a consultant after his retirement as a vintner, as a consultant to train me. And this is how I had a close relation with Henri. And actually, Henri really had a very big influence on me, yes.
And so he was a sort of, did you agree with everything, or were there certain aspects of his winemaking where you thought, maybe I would like to do that a bit differently?
Well, the answer is actually yes to both questions. So I agree with everything, but at the same time, I wanted to do things a bit differently.
Such as what?
Yes, no, it's. I mean, there is a small paradox, but it's not totally obvious. But I'm going to explain. I think we had kind of the same taste with Henri, and Henri was really somebody who loved to eat, and was friend with the chefs, the big chefs of France. He loved to go on tour and tour all the great restaurants of France with some other vintners. His wife Marcel was a very good cook. So he had a very good palate. He was very gourmand, and I think that in that respect, I'm like him. I really loved the wines he made me do in '89. '89, that was our first vintage with Christian and I, and we followed what Henri told us to do. And you do this, you do that. Okay, that was our first experience. And when we tasted the wines, we said, well, you see, it's not complicated to make great wines. And he was pleased with the result, and I was very pleased with the result too. And I found the wines were really delicious, and I looked no further. So in that respect, things have changed a little. But Henri was also, Henri was 65 at the time, and I was 25. So there was a big difference of generation, and naturally we had some differences of appreciation and of methods. So yes, there were a few things that Christian Forroy, the vineyard manager that started with me and taught me how to work the vineyards. We did things a bit differently compared to what Henri was doing. But in terms of the style, I think that really I have not moved much from that period.
I suppose, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like in the 80s, Henri Jayer was like a very good winemaker, but he wasn't the almost mythological figure he's sort of become now, that's made his wines so incredibly expensive. In those days, he was just a very, very, very good winemaker that might have been ahead of his time, but he wasn't the kind of the almost godlike figure that he is now. Is that correct?
Well, yes. He was already quite famous.
It's before my time, so yeah.
He was not a god like in like in Japanese cartoons. He was not a god, but he was quite famous, and he already had a big status, and he was retiring, so he had everybody wanted him to speak, to go to wanted to have him so that they could taste with him and talk with him, and he was already quite a figure.
Yeah.
Quite a figure. I remember we did a trip to California, must have been in '90, something like that, to the invitation of Robert Mondavi, and of course, when Henri was there, was in San Francisco and Napa. People were very, very glad to welcome him and to know him. So he was, yes, he was not a myth, but he was quite famous.
Yeah. And then just moving on, if you just move on a little bit to the vineyards that you have quite an interesting portfolio in that you have like vineyards in different appellations. Can you just talk, you don't have to talk through every single one, but can you tell me some of your vineyards that really interest you as a winemaker and why they interest you?
It's going to be difficult not to speak about every vineyard, but
a lot. Yeah.
Yes, I can try to, and you naturally can stop me also. I think that I'm fascinated with the Clos Vougeot because of both the historical print of the castle itself. on and its influence on the region. And also because of the special part we have near the castle, the fact that we have a holding of Clos Rougeot, which was very shallow soil.
Just have a picture of that. Yeah, coming up. Yeah.
So we are actually at the foot of the castle, so on the left-hand side of the castle, immediately at the foot of the castle. And if you visited the castle of the Clos Rougeot, you've realized that there is a cellier, which is the same, almost the same word as in English cellar, but it's not a cave. It's not deep down in the soil. And why is that so? Is because the monks built the castle on the bedrock to ensure good foundations. And as a result, the terroir there is a little bit the same. I mean, you dig 80 centimeters into the ground and you hit the bedrock. So that makes, and this is quite special in the Clos Rougeot. You don't have a big area like that in the Clos Rougeot. When you go a little further south, towards, so behind the castle on that photo, you, even though you're very high on the slope, you have a good depth of soil. And so that part is quite special. And it's a challenge in a way because it makes a wine which is more refined, more delicate, not as big a wine as the other Clos Rougeot. So it's a great piece, but it's not a wine that is absolutely evident and generous and big and obvious as could be other Clos Rougeot. So it's very interesting to make, and it's very interesting to taste and drink, of course. So Clos Rougeot is fascinating. The Richebourg, of course, Richebourg is Richebourg, and Cros-Parentout, and the trio, as I call it, Richebourg, Brûlé, Cros-Parentout, all these three pieces close to one another that have been worked by Henri, you know, same vintner, same vinification for the last 70 years. So it's very interesting and to make them and to compare them and to see how, you know, I think this year the Richebourg is really special, and the other year the Cros-Parentout maybe Cros-Parentout will top Richebourg, which I do not think it's the case in general. In general, I tend to prefer Richebourg over Cros-Parentout. But these past few years, I don't know. And Brûlé is so, you know, opulent, a grand seigneur, an aristocrat that we always love Brûlé. So this is a fascinating piece also.
Can I ask you what you mentioned Cros-Parentout? There's a kind of aura around Cros-Parentout, just because I guess there's only two domains that make it. But what makes Cros-Parentout so special?
I think it has. Yes, I think it has a very nice story, first of all, and because Cros-Parentout is known, it's a lieu-dit that is known, but when you read the books of the 19th century, it's not among the top wines of the village. It's, you know, it would be the equivalent of a Premier Cru, and perhaps not making in the top group of the Premier Cru. It's not Suchot, it's not Beaumont, which were already a little bit special in that time. So Cros-Parentout is well known, it's known, but is and well rated, but not to the top. And then you have somebody who comes, Henri comes and really works the vineyard. And I don't think Henri had the idea or the purpose or just thought, I'm going to make the greatest wine of the Côte d'Or. I don't think he did. I think he said, well, this is a nice piece. It's too bad it's not it's not with vineyards anymore, because this is a difficult piece.
He didn't have vines, did it? When Henri took over the vineyard, there was no vines planted in Croparentou. That's correct?
Vines, because it's a difficult part to work, and because of course you have to imagine the period between 1870 and 1945 is a difficult period. You have phylloxera, you have World War I, you have a world crisis, you have World War II. So it's really a difficult period of time. So no vines anymore. But this is obviously a good place, and Henri does what what he thinks is right, and reworks all the plot. And after 20 or 25 years, he says, "Well, this is a nice wine. I should really declare it as a Premier Cru." And then he tells me, in the 80s, I see, and the turning point for him was 85. In 85, from 85 on, I see that the wine is superior to my Échezeaux, because he had 3 different pieces of Échezeaux, so he knew Échezeaux quite well. And I see that I really get something special there. And so I think that this history of man meeting terroir is a great it's a great example. It's a great history. So it's really worth the attention, because the wine is quite special too, and whether it's made by us or by the Roger family. And therefore it's it's really so interesting that in modern times you can have an example of man meeting terroir like this.
Have you ever, just out of interest, have you ever done a vertical of the Croparentou? And do you see changes over the years?
I have actually done that a long time ago, so we need to do that. And
let me know where and when.
You will. I think, yes, I suspect it is changing a little bit. I think that actually it's not a young vineyard anymore. It was planted in the 50s, late 50s, I would say. So it's not a young vineyard anymore. But I think that the vines benefit from age, that they really improve with age, and perhaps a little bit more than Richebourg. Richebourg was planted a little earlier, but in the early 50s. And I see Richebourg evolving little. It's always been extremely fine, restrained, concentrated kind of wine, and very joyful at some point of its life. But I've not really seen a great progression of quality in Richebourg over these years. You may remember we've tasted lately, a few years back, Richebourg 86, which was it's not a great vintage of the 80s, but it had this character of Richebourg, very fragrant, very delicate, and very ethereal and kind of magical. And that quality of Richebourg was there in 86, and of course we make better vintages than 86 now, but we still have it. Croparentou has had a higher margin of progression, and maybe in the years to come, maybe we'll see. For me, I've always preferred Richebourg over Croparentou, but I'm especially in 18. And it's not, I'm not saying this because this is the latest vintage to sell, but really in 18, Croparentou is quite special. Really, I think I prefer Croparentou over Richebourg in 18. And that might be special to 18, but that also might be an indication of the progression of the wine, which is, you know, which would be a little, the curve would be a little higher than and steeper than that of Richebourg.
And just generally, your approach in the vineyard, what's your approach in terms of sort of are you interested in biodynamics, or are you happy with just organic, or what's your just general approach?
Yes, we are organic, although we're not certified, and I've never really been into biodynaming. I have.
Why is that? I mean, do you think it works, or?
I have my reasons. It's kind of curious because I really use for extensively, and also for my children, I really use homeopathy as to cure myself, and I see that it works. I think it works quite well on children also. So it's not a psychological, or whether I would say perhaps the psychological restraint comes from something else. I find the wines to be, many wines can be a little bit severe and strict with biodynamic. It's this is something that I have watched, and of course I could, but I will not quote examples, and I can think of many counter examples too. But I've seen this also being going organic. You know, you tend to have more severe wines, and I think that organic to biodynamic is a step further, and that I've never really wanted to take for fear of getting even more strict and severe wines, because this is sometimes, you know, we talked about how Henri loved wines that were easygoing and gourmand and appealing, and perhaps our wines are a little tighter and more severe and a bit more tannic than the ones that Henri were making. And maybe it's something I do, and that, you know, maybe it's me, even if I am not aware of it. It's probably this, but I do not really want to go further, and this is mostly the reason why I've not been into biodynamic.
Yeah. What's your when it comes to the harvest? Do you go into the vineyard, put a berry in your mouth, and think, yeah, time to pick, or using scientific analysis?
A little bit of everything. I don't trust myself too much on berry tasting. A little bit, yes, of course, it's important, but it's not by picking one berry there and you know, maybe eating 5 berries in the vineyard that it's not with that you can really decide the date of the harvest. I mean, it's that sample is really too small. So you need to do it to get an impression of how the seeds are, how firm the berries are. But I mean, really deciding on the date of harvest by eating 5 berries in a vineyard, no, it's not really reliable.
Yeah.
What we do is we do make analysis, we do make samples, we analyze the samples, we do look at the vineyard also. I was talking about the Cros Parentout 18, and Cros Parentout is generally harvested last because it's a cool place. And in 18, we went into the vineyard, and I looked at the vineyard and said, well, you know, this looks advanced. This looks, you know, going to reaching the end. And 18 was a special vintage in that respect, where the warm vintage, the natural order, the usual order of harvest was not really respected in 18. And I said, well, you know, I'd like to harvest this, and that was 4 days before normal, and Coparon 218 was harvested in the first half, and normally it's last. And looking at the vineyard, getting this impression of the plant reaching the end of the cycle is also very important. And it proved, we're not 100% right in 18, but it proved for that specific vineyard to be the right decision. And that was not by really tasting, it was by looking at the vineyard.
Just a question I just wanted to ask. Do you find over the years, do you pick, I'm just using Cros Paritou as an example, but do you pick it at around the same time as Emmanuel Rouget does? Or is there a little bit of a difference?
No, we tend, we tend to be earlier than the Rougets in general. Not always, but in general, we tend to be a bit earlier, yes. Yeah. Because the reason is, I think that we do have years that are very warm, vintages that are very warm, and I do not consider in such vintages that we should necessarily respect the 100-day delay between the end of flowering and harvest. So I use this as when we are at flowering, at the end of flowering, okay, 100 days, harvest might be around this. But as the season goes on, I tend to adapt.
And just moving on to the winemaking, had Samir asked a really good question, one that I wanted to ask. I mean, following sort of Jaë's philosophy, all the fruit is destemmed. Have you ever experimented with some stems? And yes. What are the results, in your opinion?
Yes, I've really, I've wanted to really experiment with stems, and I've conducted a number of experiments. I started in 2004, and I did in 2009, 10, 11, and still today. And really, it was to understand why I didn't like it. It's really, but it's no, it's interesting because I really, by making these experiments, I really ended up with the results with wines typical of wines with stems, and I thought that was interesting. I started in 2004 with some Vaudremanier Les Chauds, and it was, I thought it was nice, but it was, I don't especially like stems. I'm like Henri at the same time. Again, I don't especially like stems. And that was interesting. You had, I made an experiment with 30% stems, and you had some, strong tannins. You had that kind of vegetal aromatics. In the end, I did not carry on with it because even though it was only 30%, but 30% was making a big imprint. Yeah. I did not pursue because I thought that we were losing we were gaining a lot of structure, but we were losing the charm of Les Chauds. We gained weight and structure on one hand, but losing what really makes this wine, I think, interesting is its delicacy and charm. So
do you find it took away the terroir then, would you say? Does it mask the terroir?
Yes, I guess this is exactly it. I find it not true to what I ended up liking about this wine, actually, and I didn't want to pursue. But more interestingly, I did a small cuvée of Clos Vougeot with 80% stems in 2010. which was not necessarily the best year to do that, but really to acquire a little bit of experience of how you do a cuvée with really a high proportion of whole clusters. And that was, I found, that was very interesting. I really loved the winemaking part of that, because you have all your whole cluster in your vat. You need to crush them very gently at first. Of course, you cannot do bump overs because you have very little juice in the beginning, and this helped me understand why the wines are so radically different, because of course you cannot do the same thing to the vat as when you have everything which is destemmed. So that helped me understand a lot about the structure and the end result of the wine.
Can I ask then, do you like wines that have stems from other growers, like Domaine de la Romanée-Conti or Domaine Loire? Or is that not your taste?
Is that the question? Oh no, yes, no, yes, no. I've come to like them. It's not my natural taste, and I think that perhaps I went a little further than Henri at the time, who said really definitely doesn't like it. No, I think that I've come to like them in the sense that I think that they're more intellectual for me. That's the way I would put it. It's Henri's wine, their delicacy, their texture. This is very essential. I think, and this is what I'm really sensitive to in wine drinking. And you don't necessarily have that in these wines. You can have very very intriguing and very delicate perfume. Yes, but for me, this is more. I'm sorry, this is the way I describe it, but this is more an intellectual pleasure rather than really something I really enjoy. And I've come to like it, but I think that I've educated my taste, and I've come to like it. I, of course, like very much the wines of Romanée-Conti, and I've had even a lot of pleasure with some of them. So it's my taste is evolving, but not to the point where I want to change what I'm doing.
I've always found that, I mean, just briefly, like it usually depends on the winemaker. Some winemakers are happy using stems, and some other winemakers are happy destemming, and you're sort of one or the other. So yes, I think it comes from the winemakers, what they're comfortable with.
That's very true. That's very true. But it was. I really enjoyed doing it, and still today. So what I'm doing is using a little bit of stems in one or two cuvées. Generally, what we do add back stems. That is, we destem everything, and then we add the stems back. Not much, something like 10%. But in some wines, it really complements the wine quite well, and has, I think, a very positive effect. But this is the way I do it. I don't especially like whole cluster, because I think that it gives an aroma of it ferments inside the berry, and kind of a carbonic fermentation, and I'm not very happy with the result.
How about chaptalization? What's your views on chaptalization?
Well, it's interesting because we had, I haven't chaptalized the wines in years. Maybe, yes, a little bit in 17, but 15, 16, 18, 19, nothing. And we had a kind of cold period between 2010 and 2014 where we used chaptalization a little bit. after thinking, and maybe we're still thinking that today, after thinking that chaptalization was sort of useless, basically. I don't think it's useless. I think that it's useful in years where you're reaching 12.5% natural alcohol. In these years, because years when you're under 12 are really rare now. But in these years, it's very useful to add something like 0.5 to help the fermentation go a little further and help extract very gently a little further. But it's too bad. I mean, when you have a vintage, like in the last couple of years, where you can naturally reach 13 or 13.5, it's really too bad to harvest early and chaptalize, because that I like to do. Yeah.
Just before we, I'm going to take us away from Burgundy soon. I've got one question that I'd like to ask. Eric's asked this. If you could make a wine in any other part of the Côte d'Or, if you can farm any other vineyard, what would you like to make?
I have so many wishes.
You can only have one. I'm not generous.
Red or white?
You can have one of each.
Thank you. So for white, I have two, because I have one which is really my wildest dream, and of course, it's not surprisingly Montrachet, and one more reasonable, one more reachable, that would be Corton Charlemagne. Because I really love the hill of Corton. We have a few holdings there, and I would absolutely love make a white wine out of the hill of Corton. And with red, it's very easy. I think that if I could do one other wine, it would be Musigny.
Musigny, yeah. I can understand.
I mean, the Chambol is the sister of Vaudremanet, and I think that Musigny is this charm and refinement and power at the same time, and it's probably a little bit more delicate than Richebourg, and but I would love Musigny.
But in the end, you that might not be possible, but you have ventured outside Burgundy. Can you tell us about your project in Oregon?
Yes, it's I've been doing wine since vintage 2014 there, and it's been a great experience. Really, exporting Burgundy in a way, not making Burgundy in Oregon, but exporting Burgundy. And of course, I had been making wine for 25 years then, and exporting Burgundy to Oregon and seeing it work and adapting was, as a winemaker, a fascinating experience. I think I'm a better winemaker now with this experience than I used to be, and it's been absolutely great. Conditions.
How did it begin? What led you to? Because it was quite unusual for a Burgundy winemaker to leave the region. What led to it?
This is true. We're very much into our terroir, and we're very much involved in the day-to-day operations. And
you and it's yourself and Jay
Bober, my partner in Oregon. I think I had this dream, probably in me for a long time, of going outside the region and growing vines in a new region. So I think that that was in me for a very long time. And when Jay, who was a very long time friend, gave me a call and explained that he was on something into Oregon. In Oregon, I really liked the idea. I really wanted to make sure that Oregon was worth it. And you know, we tasted a number of wines. I went to the region. I saw a region which was really dedicated to Pinot Noir. And this is really what I loved about the region, the fact that it's 70% Pinot Noir. It's very serious about Pinot Noir.
This is in the Willamette Valley, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's and therefore, you know, when you dedicate yourself as a region for a grape variety, you can achieve greatness. Therefore, I was very quickly seduced by Oregon, by the wines that we were making, that I tasted, and I thought that, you know, it can work. It can work, and I will be very happy to try my hand at making wine in Oregon. So it's really been a very nice journey so far, and I love going there. I love making wine there, and still have a lot of work to do, but it's I love it.
Yeah. You said like you saw that Oregon wines can achieve greatness. Is that greatness the same greatness as in Burgundy, or is it different?
Yes, I think that I was, you know, of course, I was a little bit snobbish. You know, Burgundy. I think we have the greatest terroirs in the world, of course. And but I was fascinated in my very first years in Oregon to see how different these regions were, these vineyards were, and there are very young vineyards, and at this, and also you have. It's basically the same clones from vineyard to vineyard. Not necessarily exactly the same clones, but you have what I mean to say is that the variety, the clonal variety in Oregon is much less than it is in Burgundy. Because in Burgundy, we have the genetic diversity of the Pinot Noir right from the beginning. And in Oregon, you have only a choice of clones. You may have perhaps 10 clones which are the most common. So it's fascinating to see that with these material, which is basically the same, you have, you know, with young vineyards, you have such a different expression from one place to the other. And I've not found greatness in young vineyards, but when you start to reach 25 years, you get some things which are really very interesting, and that will be great, and some of them are already great. So that was my best. This is really when I thought, well, you know, I was right to go to Oregon, because if they can achieve this with that kind of vineyard, and the vineyard is only 20-25 years, you know, it's very extremely promising.
Yeah. Has it changed your view on Burgundy?
Yes, I think it has, in a way. First of all, it has vindicated a lot of things about Burgundy, and the fact that the way we do things. I think that in many things we're right. At the same time, I've always felt also that you know, we are perhaps a little bit too complacent in the region, and especially with the big success that we have now, and the success is the right one. I mean, the region has made tremendous progress, so it's deserved. But at the same time, you know, there are some things where we could do better. We should really question ourselves. And in that respect, working in Oregon is very useful.
Just expanding a bit to Burgundy, I mean, how do you feel like Burgundy prices now are very, very expensive, and a lot of, especially younger people, they can't afford the same wines that I was lucky enough to drink when I started. How does that make you? How does that make you feel? And is there anything that can be done about it, or is that's just supply and demand?
No, I think that it's difficult to do something about it, but the Corona crisis is going to take care of it, I hope. And
Do you think that will have an impact on Burgundy prices, if not already?
Oh, no, yes, I think so. I think so. Maybe the top wines, it's hard to say whether they are going to go down in price, but probably they're not going to increase in the near future. That's already something. I think that we really need to keep to cool things off in terms of the lower end price, the wines, the village wines. And it's not only the great wines, it's not only Richebourg, Croparentou, and all these very famous wines in the Côte de Nuit. It's the Von Romalet village, it's the Gevrey village, and all these wines are being pulled. And as a negociant, we have this small négoce operation, and I see that I buy grapes, and I see that the prices of grapes have they continue to increase to this day. And 19, I thought that 19 is a very good vintage, seems to be a very good vintage. But I thought that after 18, a big harvest where prices increased, not much, but a little bit increased. They did not go down as I hoped they would. But 19 increased over 18. It's continuous, and that is not reasonable. That is not reasonable. We need to go down on these prices. We need to have affordable village wines, and this is not the case anymore.
I've got two last questions before we have to go. Firstly, of course, I should have asked at the beginning, but what are you drinking?
I'm drinking a Nuit Boudeau 11.
And how is it tasting?
It shows very well. I opened that wine because somebody told me he had a bottle lately and that it was showing very well. And so I saw that in the cellar, and I said, well, I'm going to check it myself. 11 is a vintage which is has not necessarily a great reputation, but I've always liked the charm, the approachability of that vintage. And Nuit Boudeau is a wine which is generally quite complex and seductive when relatively young. So yes, I've enjoyed this wine during this interview, and see it come together and develop and open, and that's I can say that it's very enjoyable to drink right now. Yeah.
And my last question is, and it's a typical boring question, but some of the greatest wines I've ever had have come from your domain. And in fact, there's one coming up in a report that you poured in November, which I haven't published. Don't say what it is, but it's coming up in a Vinous report fairly soon. So, but for you, is there one wine that you've drunk in your life that really stands out, that you will always remember?
Oh yes, you mean from our domain or from
anywhere?
From anywhere.
Both.
No, there are a few. I really liked a Richebourg 04. I tasted a few years back in Hong Kong, and that was at dinner at a very good restaurant. And Richebourg was the last wine, and actually that was the distributor's reserve. I didn't know the wine was on the menu. And I had brought, we had agreed on a number of wines, and the last wine we had agreed on was a Échezeaux 03. And when I saw the menu, I thought, oh my God, the 04 is going to be crushed by the 03. So opulent, big wine, and 04, lighter, and it's going to be crushed. This is a catastrophe. So I spent a terrible evening until the end, where actually, yes, of course, the original 04 was lighter than the Chazot 03, but it was flying at 10,000 feet compared to the other wine by its, its magic. So that was a really very telling story about this the character of Fréjebourg we talked about earlier. And naturally, other wines. I remember Vega Sicilia, which was really great of the 70s, and of course some many other Burgundies, and in particular from Romanée-Conti. I had La Tâche, or I would say more recently Grands Échezeaux 07, which was absolutely marvelous.
So, 07.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Jean-Nicolas, thank you very much. It's been a fantastic hour speaking to you about everything in Vendôme and Burgundy and Oregon. And good luck for the rest of the growing season. I hope to be down later this year when we're a bit more free to travel, hopefully. But thank you very much for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.